Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about the hardest feature that I have worked on and how I hacked it together. So let's get into it. So the actual question in question here was, Frederick, what is the hardest feature you have worked on and how did you, and I quote here, hack it together? Well, dude, let's start off by saying that when you work on something that is truly difficult and truly, I will just assume that you were talking about the hardest thing that I did that I'm actually happy that I did, because I have written Satan's code a few times and done things like create a special if condition in the code that checks which environment I am on the URL, and then I will do something magical just to accommodate something that is really not supposed to happen. It's just full of wrongness and bad practices, and anybody who saw that out of context would judge me at a personal level and just assume that I am a horrible human being. I have written stuff like that. And in situations like the one that I found myself, I swear to God, I felt bad. I felt like, going into a church and feeling singed on my flesh from being in that whole environment when I did something like that. I was the Antichrist. But I had no choice. Famous last words. Anywho, let's just assume that you're talking about the hardest thing that I've actually worked on, the thing that I'm actually tried to make a good implementation of. So I think I've already made a video like this where I talk a little bit about one of the main projects that I'm involved in these days. Well, I wouldn't say I'm not involved in it anymore because I've moved on to a new team, because hey, new better things. Doing something the same exact way over and over gets a little bit tedious and boring, so you want to try new stuff out, right? So because the last thing that I did was probably one of the hardest things I've had to face in my career. If we're talking just technical challenges, the office challenges is probably at one of my previous jobs when I needed to pretty much figure out a feasible strategy to migrate a really, really old code base for one of the world's biggest companies to something sustainable. That was very, very hard. I learned a lot about office politics and having a strategy and like all of these things that didn't really feel that was like, I mean, it was useful. It was just I felt I got that a little bit early in my career, because that's not usually the sort of thing that you face when you're like a year or something like that into your career. But hey, stuff happened and now I can tell you about it. But my last project was to figure out an algorithm that will take the payment history from any bank system basically in the world and figure out if this sequence of transactions are a subscription. That doesn't sound like a very hard problem when you may first listen to it, but it is one of the world's, like it's one of the hardest things that you can imagine to figure out. And I'll explain just the basics as to why that is. Well, the first problem is that you really, like each of these different records have a different shape, which means that you need to normalize all of this data into some generic type of construct. The second part that is really hard about it is that you don't really have all that much information to go on. Usually you have some prices, you have some timings, you have sometimes you're lucky and you have some type of description of kind of what the transaction was entailed and like who sent money to who and so forth. And based on these few data points, you kind of have to figure out what subscription it is. Now, if you are lucky, then the company is something like, say, Spotify, that offers one single kind of product, and you know roughly what the price is going to be, because the price is always going to be the same for every company. That's the easy case. So there's one product and there's a very set price and an interval that you can follow along to, right? That's a simple problem. But let's say that you were subscribing to something that has let's say that you have a telecommunications company that offers phone, broadband, television, etc., etc. And the best part is they bake it all into the same transaction. So they don't charge you for each thing, they charge you as a lump, like a big chunk of a sum. How do you know what that person is subscribing to? Let's say that you have an issue, you have someone subscribing to insurance type of things or stuff like this. and let's say that they have a premium package the first 3 months that they sign up, and then the price increases or it lowers depending on situation. You may have campaign type of things related to the pricing. How will you know if that is still the same subscription? Because the price really sharply changed. It's not a deviation, a very simple standard deviation. It's a very sharp drop or a sharp increase in pricing. Are you still sure that this is the same subscription, or did it change somehow? That uncertainty is hard. We're talking about among the trickiest things that you can imagine, because you basically know nothing and you need to figure out how to enrich this information so that you know what's actually going on. But that is, I don't want to make the exact same video that I made last time. So I'm going to talk about the hardest problem that I'm working on today with my new team, where basically we had a business request for, well, this is also a very tricky one. So we basically the company wanted to make user surveys, or rather one of the big features that they need to support, or that they have a desire for, is to create different user surveys to find out different types of information from a user, to figure out what they have for preferences for, if they're environmentally aware, is the price the most important thing, just to get to know the user type of thing, right? Now, the problem with that is that the business people have no technical knowledge, but they have the desire to be able to have a standard template of components and a standard layout of things. And as you know, in most startups, the idea of having something standard is kind of tricky to sell or to swing in the beginning of things, because things are moving so fast and things are changing all the time. So design can just decide that, hey, tomorrow we're going to make this, and then all of a sudden all your nice templates and all your nice standard components are falling. You need to create another component and another component and then another component, because they never make up their damn mind, right? So I had waited for quite some time until I took on this project, because I didn't, even if I knew they were asking for it, but I didn't want to take it on until I knew that they had settled on something. And I knew that I couldn't just tell them to settle. They had to mature into that workflow by themselves. And now I feel like they're kind of growing up and they're at that point. So I got the designs and had a look. And it looked great, so I started working on this framework of UI components where I'm making them standard, basically. I was working on this yesterday, actually, so if this turns out well, which I hope it will, I will of course make a video and I will show you how I made it, and we will talk about the pros and the cons and the considerations and all of that good stuff in some tutorial type of video, right? But the tricky part about this is that they don't just want a developer to be able to use these standard components. They want to be able to design it themselves. So that's the fundamental problem. How do you give a person who has no knowledge of CSS, JavaScript, HTML, or anything like that, the ability to compose their own views? For those of you who don't know this, for the people who have been doing this for a while, you may know that my first thought was that, okay, we need some type of editor type of system, right? It's drag and drop pretty much, Dreamweaver level stuff, or something like using Xcode and artboards or storyboards for iOS and for Android, like some type of XML schema or something like that, where they have a visual editor where they can just drag and drop. And that is exactly the thing that I started building. So I designed this was for React, so it was pretty simple. I created a XML configuration schema that basically maps, and XML is a very good fit for this sort of work, where it fits the tags in React pretty much. And I limit all of the options down to, okay, you have some properties that you can tweak here and there, you can set a margin here and there and so forth, just to limit the scope as much as possible, to simplify as much as possible. Because we already have standard components, it's just that to fit every type of the layout, I need to figure out what container components, such as, you might need a container component that centers something. You might need a list container that just lists the items out, and then you can just plug them in, right? So that part I made, and it works pretty well. So I created a parser that just basically converts the XML to React components. and now I'm basically just creating a routing system, because these are flows of events that take place. It's not just one page. You need to compose them together so that you click here, you go to that page. If you click there, you go to that page, etc., etc., etc. And then of course capturing all this form information in some accessible way. And then all of this needs to be possible to hook into the main code base, which also is possible at this point. The thing that I'm going to work on next is the editor itself, and that's something that is also fairly new and fairly tricky for me, where I have to create a drag and drop editor. I'm thinking something like we're going to have the XML schema, because all this is going towards is that you can do the design exactly as you want it, and then you at the end of the day you're just going to be left with an XML configuration that then can be converted into actual React code or actual JavaScript code. And that's also fairly straightforward. But the editor itself, and doing all the drag and dropping and highlighting and getting the user experience right just so that it creates a nice workflow for non-technical people, that's going to be a challenge, because basically what I have to do is to recreate Android, like a basic version of Android Studios or Xcode or Dreamweaver or something like that. And that is definitely a challenge to do in a nice way. So what I want you to take away from this is that, at least for me, the hardest thing that I've ever worked on is the first thing was to migrate a really, really large code base for a big, very big company. A lot of learnings about office politics. Second thing was to figure out an algorithm that identifies universally, regardless of company or regardless of bank, if something is a subscription or not. That was also extremely tricky. It's still hard today. It's still not a completely solved problem. And the third thing is to create basically a drag and drop visual component system for non-technical people, so that they can pretty much build whatever website they want without any technical knowledge. So yeah, so that's going to be it. Have a great day.